All right. Hey, welcome back, everyone. All right. So, as we continue our conversation about the role of ethics and CSR, corporate social responsibility, to strategy and just running businesses in general, just the general importance of this topic, we have to stop and realize, right? We talk about it in this kind of conceptual, idealistic idea where we talk about ethics as this thing guiding the firm, or the firm needs to act ethically, or things like that, right? But really, when we think about it, what do we understand about collections, right? An organization is just a collection of individuals. So therefore, really, we can't fully understand this phenomenon at a firm level without understanding the importance of that, kind of stressing this idea of morality and ethical behavior at the individual level. And who is it that really has usually a strong impact in our organizations, or guides our behaviors, guides the way that we act, our attitudes, motivations? Really, it's our managers a lot of the time. One of the reasons why we teach all of you as future managers all about these kinds of ideas. So if we start to look at this from what we say like a taxonomy of management morality, we might look at this and say that really what we've come to the conclusion of, we really have kind of a taxonomy of three different types of managers that usually exist in organizations, which we deem to be either moral managers, immoral managers, or amoral managers. So let's just take a look a little bit about what these really entail. So when we're talking about moral managers, we probably understand what this is all about. People who have high standards of ethical behavior. They hold their own actions to that level, and they hold other people to that same level of ethics. They are kind of what we call like an organizational citizen or steward of ethical behavior. People look to them and they habitually act in a way that they know they should, and that, essentially the way that they would like to see other people act as well. I work with a gentleman like this in my department here at Nebraska that immediately always comes to mind. He's kind of this guy that was I got my PhD here as well. He was kind of like one of these like guiding light people for me as a student, and somebody I've really come to like look up to, because it's very admirable. He always acts this kind of way. However, I will say I've had equally as many that fit into these other categories. The immoral manager, right? We all know somebody who has no regard for ethics. They think that ethical standards don't really like apply. They believe good people should not be spending their time, agonizing over the right thing to do. And they basically think that if it's not in my best interest, not interested in it. Unfortunately, I won't name any names. I know some people that way too. But the last one, the interesting one, the amoral manager, right? This would be the person where we had this conversation earlier, right, about the difference between legality and ethics, or legal and moral. And they would just say, hey, if it's legal, then it's not unethical. All right. If it was unethical, we would have made it illegal, kind of thing. They basically feel like, if you're doing more than is legally required, that's stupid. They just think that ethics might be important. They might have that attitude, but just not in business. I definitely had an advisor like this too. Very interesting guy. But when we look at it from a corruptions perceptions index, let's just take a look around the world, right, doing business, right? There's a lot of available evidence right now to us that tells us that a real sizable majority of managers in the world are either amoral or immoral. Not exactly what we like to hear, right? But there's ongoing research by Transparency International organization that shows corruption amongst public officials and in business transactions is widespread across the world. We see the United States in particular there at a CPI score of 67, right? The higher your score, the better. Like, the lower that you are means the more unethical business dealings go on in your nation, and basically what the perceptions around the world of the people doing business with you really are. In 2020, this global average across 180 countries in the world was done, and the global average was a 43. Okay. We hear a lot of people complaining an awful lot that things are unethical in the United States. Our CPI index is at a 67. Okay, it's 50% higher than the average. The average globally was 43. 2/3 of the company or the countries in the world scored below a 50. Really kind of interesting information at this point. Now, this kind of brings us to ask this question, of course. Okay, so then what drives this kind of unethical strategies and behavior? So if managers are the real important spotlight of what we're talking about right now, what causes them to do these kinds of things? What might cause us to consider acting unethically once in a while? Well, three main culprits to this that we find drive the majority of this kinds of behavior in people. And first is just this idea, this overzealous pursuit of personal gain. This I need as much as humanly possible, right? Some of the time we are so busy chasing this idea of profits, or whatever our ultimate idea about success and performance really is, that we think we get this like tunnel vision, nothing else is important. We stop seeing oversight by people who might stop unethical behaviors because it might limit to the amount of profits or like high performance that they're existing that everybody loves. And this idea of self-gain and kind of greed supersedes our ethical principles. It's a very common thing. We also see down here at the bottom, this culture of profitability at any cost kind of goes alongside with that, right? We basically, sometimes we get this idea in organizations or as individuals that, like we don't necessarily take consideration after a certain point for things like, what's ethical. It's like, we've already made it. We're still in pursuit of, high performance, things like that. That's really all that matters to us. I think the biggest one, though, driving this, you see right there in the middle, and this is that hairy middle ground, right? Our heavy pressure to perform. We live, especially in the United States, in a society that's a very like put up or shut up kind of atmosphere in business a lot of the time. So we developed this idea. We got to do whatever we can to deliver. We tie your compensation to your performance, and it becomes a really slippery slope that gets easier and easier, right? We know from research in social science, it is a very slippery slope once you decide to do something small and unethical. And maybe you've noticed this in your own life from time to time, but we always push our boundaries. It's just a part of kind of who we are. And that is true whether it is in a good way or a bad way. So your brain gets more and more and more comfortable all the time with its actions, no matter what they are. So even when you start doing something unethical, your brain becomes more and more comfortable with that kind of activity the more you've done it. So soon you'll begin to justify extreme ethical compromises if you start with small ethical compromises. And that's why it's so important we teach this stuff to people now. Is your brain's going to get comfortable. It's going to start justifying your behaviors easier and easier, and you're going to start pushing the limits more and more and more, doing things that you never would have done in the past. And unfortunately, what we know is when managers start acting this way, sometimes they're the individuals with access to things that can create very big problems when they compromise their ethics.